Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Private Practice Growth Club YouTube channel. Today I have another featured practice owner, another occupational therapist. Her name is Michelle Coates. Thank you so much for joining us, Michelle. Michelle owns a consultancy company called Blue Balance, and I'm really excited to hear from her, to hear how she has used her occupational therapy skills to think outside of the box beyond just the traditional clinical one-on-one type of service. So, Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Please, will you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Fantastic. Tasneem, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join you, and I hope that I can give you some insight into what my journeys look like and hopefully what the next couple of years will look like for me at Blue Balance. So as you said, I am an occupational therapist, and I am also a mom of two, and I live in Joburg. And my journey started out with me studying OT and graduating in 2009. After that, I studied a diploma, hand therapy diploma at the University of Pretoria, and then went on to do my master's by dissertation at this university. And after I had finished that, my husband and I got the opportunity to move to Switzerland for a contract that he was doing. So I had been in clinical, working in a government hospital up until that point, and we took this leap to go to Switzerland for 2 years, but unfortunately I couldn't work as an OT in Switzerland because of the language barriers and all of that. So I went over, and having never really worked in a corporate environment, I was now looking for jobs, and eventually found a job at Johnson & Johnson, where I worked on the compliance management and records management team. And although that was very far away from anything I'd ever done on an occupational therapy sort of basis, it was really nice for me to firstly see how the medical and pharmaceutical side of J&J works, but also get a bit of an understanding of how things work in corporate and get a feel for that. And I really enjoyed my time there. I learned a lot, just a lot of the sort of soft skills that you learn in corporate that you don't necessarily learn at varsity or when you're in a clinical environment as an occupational therapist. And then when we got back to South Africa, I said, okay, well, let me see if I can sort of combine my corporate, this enjoyment of corporate and my occupational therapy skills. And that's when I went and worked at Momentum as a claims assessor. And I was there for about a year and a half, really enjoyed it. It was quite an eye-opening experience, moving into this role. Nice because I got to be medically based, but still involved in the corporate environment, did some training with clients, and got exposed to brokers, which also was quite a learning experience for me. And after that, I moved across to ICAS, where I worked as an absence, incapacity and disability case consultant. And I really loved that. I think that suited my personality really well because I was a little bit closer to the individuals, so whether that's the patient or the employees, but also the clients. And I did a lot of training, got to travel around South Africa quite a bit, and really enjoyed that experience quite a lot. From there, I then got a wonderful opportunity at Discovery to head up the disability case management team in the group risk space. And that for me was, I could say, quite an ideal position because I got to combine my experience of claims assessing as well as my experience in the absence incapacity space from, a wellness point of view. And there, what my role was to continue to grow the return to work programs that they had already initiated and try and look how, we could use different avenues to get people back to work and to support individuals in that journey. But also one of my biggest roles was to initiate an early intervention program where we actually tried to help individuals before they got to that point where they got a diagnosis and they became disabled and went on to a disability benefit. So that was a fantastic role. I was there for a couple of years, and then at the end of last year, I decided to step out of the corporate space. And that's when I opened up Blue Balance, which is essentially as you mentioned, it's a disability and health management consulting company.
Wow, that's quite a journey. It's quite interesting. I've done a few of these interviews, and I always find it interesting how the person's starting point is never a true indication of where the current point in time is. And oftentimes, majority of the times that I've interviewed people as featured practice owners, where they currently are is not what they ever dreamed or expected they would end up when they first graduated from occupational therapy. But I want to go back in time a little bit on that. And I have to ask then, what made you choose occupational therapy as your profession in the first place?
So when I started getting into the later years of high school, I was obviously looking at what profession I think I would be suited to. And I did a bit of job shadowing where I went to see people in different professions. And I then made the decision that I wanted to do something where I could really help people, a profession where, I got to show sort of my caring nature and was able to improve people's lives from a medical point of view. I looked into the different medical and health science degrees, and one of the big attractions for me at that stage was really the potential to work with children. And I thought, how fantastic to be able to work with children, improve their lives, and I think like a lot of OTs coming into the degree thought that I would actually be a PEDS OT, which is not really something that I've spent much time doing. So definitely, yeah, my interest in the medical field, my caring personality, I would say, led me to be an OT. And then as I went through the OT degree and learned more about just, the philosophy of occupational therapy and how really the goal is to improve functioning and to use activities in order to be able to achieve that, it really resonated with me. And it just made so much sense that you would use an activity in order to help a person to become more independent and to function in the different areas of their life. So I love of OT grew over the years. And then as I moved out of my OT degree and really into sort of a practicing OT role, I realized how huge the profession is. And that for me is something that is so special as an occupational therapist, that I can work half day, 1 day a week, full day in corporate, PEDS private practice. I can run my own clinical practice in a hospital. That the variation in the OT profession is something that's so fantastic. And to be honest, I could do all of it if I wanted to do lecturing in the morning and PEDS in the afternoon and VOC rehab on Friday. There's OTs that do that. So that's something that as well that I really just love about the OT profession.
Yes, it is truly diverse. And, I was just explaining I was on an Instagram live yesterday for an ADHD support group. And the question was like, what is the role of the OT? And I said, the first thing is to first understand what is occupational therapy in the first place. Because a lot of people, the perception of what OT is limited to what the exposure to it is. So if you had a kid who went to OT, you think that that's what OTs do. And I think it's both of the positive of the fact that it's so diverse and you can work in any space. And the negative is that that's the reason why people have such a gross misunderstanding of what OT is. But I was explaining that, like you wouldn't even think that as an OT, your therapeutic input could even involve never even looking or touching a patient that is the end recipient of your work, because we also have such a big role to play, because such a big part of our work also takes into consideration context and the macro environment, which is what makes our profession unique, because it's the only health profession that really traverses across to social and economic and advocacy lines. We don't only work within a clinical mindset. But that brings me to the next question, which is that you've now obviously had the experience to work in clinical. You've also had the experience to work in corporate, and then a combination of the two within a corporate environment. What would you say is the key differences between a clinical private practice in that disability management and return to work sector? Because there's obviously lots of OTs who have OT private practices who provide the clinical services in that respect, and what you, both in your role, in a role like the one you had in Discovery, but also in your current business.
So I think the first difference, and definitely the biggest difference between what I'm doing now and what a VOC rehab clinical OT would be doing, would be the sort of amount of contact with the client or the patient or the employee. So if you have an OT who is a specialist in VOC rehab, they would be getting referrals from the insurer or from a wellness company. They would be doing a an assessment, whether it be an FCE or functional screening, spending that time directly with the individual, typically, maybe not in COVID times, but typically sitting in front of the individual and, doing those standardized assessments, really getting to know them, to see their behavior, get those sort of underlying hints from the way they speak and the way that they act. And that is a lot of what your VOC rehab OTs are doing, very face-to-face based. What I did both in the corporate space and the majority of what I'm doing now in the health and disability management role that I'm in now is I want to sort of say it's more paper-based, or it's more program development and training based. What I do is and just to emphasize that I'm not running an OT practice, don't, FTEs and all of that, but what I do is I would get requests from either an employer directly or from an insurer who wants me to support one of their clients, or even from maybe a wellness company or a medical aid who needs a little bit of assistance in an area where they're experiencing a problem. It might be to do with an individual, or it might be to do with a group of people or an organization where there's a really high claims rate, or they've noticed this problem, or, whatever it is, just somebody or some group of people who are really at risk. And I would then develop a prevention or promotion program to try and help that person so that their high risk factors don't cause them to get a diagnosis and, to become disabled in the future. So there might be an organization where they're employed with an insurer. The insurer sees that over the last 3 years, they've had a really high rate of mental illness claims. So, it's much higher than the average for that industry. And there's some concerns. The insurer might come to me and say, okay, could you please investigate? That would entail me looking at the data, whatever information they have available, getting feedback from managers, individuals, employees in the company on, sort of what's going on there, to try and figure out what are the potential problems, and then developing an intervention strategy as to how can we go about actually supporting these individuals and the group or the organization as a whole to try and bring down those number of people with mental health issues or symptoms. So my work involves a lot of analyzing of data to try and figure out where are the problem areas. It involves a lot of research to try and see, okay, once we've seen that, what is the literature, what's best practice in that area specifically, and then a lot of strategy. And every client that I work with, the strategy is very different, because you might say, okay, well, we're going to do a cardiometabolic program, and I've done that for 3 other clients. But when you look there, you say, oh, their role is quite different. These are blue-collar workers as opposed to white-collar. These individuals are working shift work, whereas I was working with people, in the last project that we're working from 8 to 5. So while you might be sort of using a template with regard to the different programs, it varies very specifically on what those individuals and what that organization actually is looking like and where the biggest problem areas are. So that was a long kind of summary, but essentially I'm less hands-on, in terms of face-to-face interaction with the employees than somebody who was or is a vocational rehab OT. However, I rely a lot on hands-on clinical VOC rehab OTs, as well as other medical professionals as well, to help me run programs. So, I might get involved in an ergonomics program with an employer and get an OT who's actually a specialist in that area to support me once I have designed a program that I think would be suitable for that employer. I might use a health coach or a dietitian to support me with training and one-on-one interaction for a company where there's really big cardiometabolic concerns. So I think that's the beauty of it, is that I have a good understanding of clinically what OTs do and what other health professionals do. So I know how to incorporate their skills into the program. I don't do all of the hands-on work. I oversee and coordinate that and act as the middleman once I've identified the trends.
Yeah, it sounds so fascinating. And, I've always said that I feel like occupational therapists are probably from within the health profession, probably the most suited to be the center from which the other spokes kind of come off to get the wheel turning, because we are one of the most holistic professions, and because we almost have to draw on the expertise in different areas. And that sounds a lot like what you're doing, but I'm also hearing you, because you're in the corporate space and hearing you talking about data and all of these things. Were there any particular areas you had to really upskill or courses you had to do just in order to, from that data analytics point of view and interpreting and translating that into programs? Was there any particular skills for other people who think, wow, that sounds like something that I'd really like to get into, that you would recommend people look at to give them the skill set to be able to do what you do well?
So a lot of it has really been hands-on experience, but there definitely are courses. And I think what I often feel is, when you do your OT undergrad degree, there's not a lot of time actually spent on understanding data or even just learning to use Excel. How does Excel work? How do you use formulas, etc. So that was the first place that I started and that was actually when I was still in Switzerland. I had to run a program which used Excel, and I didn't even know the first thing about it. I didn't even know how to do a sum in a block. I then went on the sort of initial, intermediate, and advanced Excel courses to get an understanding of what you can do. And it's a magnificent program, really. It can be frustrating, but it's got a lot of really useful benefits, definitely. And yeah, so I started by just learning the basics of Excel. How does Excel work? How do you put formulas in? How can you make graphs from the formulas? What's the pivot table, etc. And once I had that basic understanding, that was a really good place for me to start. And then I really just played around a lot with it. And a lot of what my role was in my last job was writing reports for clients and putting together strategies and putting together sort of annual review reports. That is something that I just tried it out. This works, this doesn't work. And I think that's the best way to understand data analytics is really by just doing things and looking for trends. So, are searching through that information and putting it into a graph or into a table to try and see, okay, why does that look like that? Ask yourself why all the time, why are we seeing more men, or maybe let's say men taking longer to return to work than women? What could that be? And then try and come up with potential reasons for it. Not, unfortunately, I can't say, oh, do this course or do that course, and that would make you sort of an expert in data analytics, or not from my experience. I know there are fantastic courses out there. The universities run short courses. There's a lot of online courses as well. So if you wanted to do that, you could definitely do that. But my experience has really come from just trying to use it. And then also looking at using basic AI. There's a lot of tools out there that you can actually use to help you write formulas and just to allow you to do things that you maybe wouldn't be able to do with just a sort of a basic knowledge of Excel. But it's really exciting, and I actually think that there's such a lot of room for OTs to grow on the sort of data analysis side. And I've been working with an OT in the rehab space recently, and I developed a database framework for her to track all her patients' information on, so that she's able to review that information and see, where are her strengths, where does she need to improve, what feedback does she need to provide to her clients to give them an overview of what she's been doing, what her success rate is. So that's also a space that I actually had never really planned to get into when I started Blue Balance. But just based on the need that I've seen from an occupational therapy point of view, I want to be, doing a little bit more work in that space next year to try and help skill OTs just in a very sort of basic way on how they could improve their data capturing and then utilization of that data to take them to the next level.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it kind of is linked to what my next question was, which is to say that, as OTs, we know that it makes complete sense and it's completely logical that OTs should be key role players in disability management and health promotion, especially in workplace settings, because it's in our name. It's all about the doing, getting people back to doing. And yet we are not normally the first consideration. Like, I like to go onto LinkedIn to look at jobs just to kind of see what is the market like for occupational therapy. And like oftentimes I'll look at a job and I'm like, the way you're describing the roles and responsibilities and the skills that are required is basically an OT, but you're looking for somebody with an coaching certification, or you're looking for mostly psychologists, like a clinical psychologist. And it's not to throw any shade on a clinical psychologist, but psychologists generally are mainly around the individual. So why do you think it is that occupational therapists are not currently taking up more space in this industry? My suspicion is it's our own fault, because we tend to focus so much on the qualitative, and we are not putting out the data-driven case studies, which is what generally corporate spaces respond to. They make decisions on data, not on feelings. Like, yes, that sounds great, but show me the numbers, right? So is that the reason, or do you see other reasons why OTs are not currently taking up more of those spaces?
So yes, I completely agree with you. I think there is so much more room for us to grow in that corporate space, the disability management, health promotion side of things. I definitely think that the lack of knowledge of what an OT does, and we spoke about it towards the beginning of the session, but that lack of knowledge is a big problem. So when people look and they say, we need someone to be our middleman, to pull this, to review this, to create this, they don't realize that that's actually the role of the OT, because they are either thinking of the OT that rehabilitated their mother who had a CV, or they're thinking of the OT that their child went to, when they were at school. So they're not thinking that's the perfect person to bring into our corporate environment to, do a risk analysis and provide us with interventions. So that, I think, is the biggest thing, just the lack of knowledge of what OTs do and how vast our service offering is, and how much we can offer that. And I completely agree with you. So I think that we also don't demand the attention that we deserve, in the corporate space and in the medical space. So I also spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and there are very few OTs, especially within South Africa, that are very active on LinkedIn. And, that's when we really need to be showing our skills, showing what we're doing, showing case studies, showing results, definitely results, to say, okay, we received an improvement of 10% when we did this job coaching program, or, 60% of the people that went through our program returned to work, or whatever it is. But that's a fantastic place to connect with people in the corporate space, to show them what OTs do, to show them how we could we could improve their processes or their practices, whatever that is. So yeah, we really just need to market ourselves as much as possible. And like you said, get involved where we can in that quantitative study, journal article side. I've been looking for journal articles a lot, like in the early intervention space, and, in the case management space, and really battling to find recent South African articles that guide, other OTs on what we do and how we benefit. So I would say if we could just get onto LinkedIn, start showcasing what we're doing, what improvements we're making in people's lives, in corporations, and get that out there so that people can see the other side of OT that they might not necessarily have seen with their parents or themselves or their kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we are seeing now a shift because of the younger generation being more willing to put themselves out there into the public space. So, there's this OT in Cape Town, Amy Isaacs, who owns the Self-Care Studio. So she has an OT practice, Amy Isaacs OT, but she also opened the Self-Care Studio, where is a space where she does like sip, breathe, and paint, and it's not therapy, but it's preventative. It's like early intervention type stuff. But the fact that she is willing to go onto Espresso Show, for example, and talk about mindfulness, which is usually a space they would only invite a psychologist into, or Alta's our own association. The marketing team is really fantastic about getting us PR opportunities. So we constantly have like the president speaking on radio stations about various topics. And so this is the thing. It's like the way that, and when we talk about ethical marketing, I often present on this topic. I always say, no matter what profession you are, the rule of thumb is promote your profession, not yourself, because by association, because you are that profession, they automatically assume you are the expert, right? So you are ethical because you are not, touting, canvassing yourself. You're promoting the profession, which is our promotion. It's good for the profession, which is the whole point of HPCSA, is to uplift the image of the professions. And so I think as occupational therapists, if we can not be self-focused in our marketing and market the profession, it benefits everyone. And it's that expression of we grow by lifting others, right? But on the topic of marketing, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the transition that you made from employed to business owner. Because of course you can be excellent at your job at Discovery or Momentum or wherever you're working. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be a good, like a business owner, because it's completely different. It's like having two jobs basically, right? Because you do the job, but you also have to run the business. So tell me a little bit about firstly, the decision to leave the safety and stability of a paid job to taking the plunge to go on your own. Let's start there. What made you decide to take this crazy decision, and how did you know you were ready to do it?
So it's something that I have thought about sort of on and off for the last couple of years. Even when I was in the clinical space, I thought, okay, maybe I'm going to start up, hand therapy, private practice. And then when I got involved in corporate, I was very comfortable because, like you say, you know what salary you're going to earn. And then started kind of dabbling with this idea, and then COVID hit, and it made me take 10 steps back because I thought, oh no, at that stage, you really wanted to be in a position where you were comfortable. I was very lucky that the role that I was doing at the time, continued, and we actually even got busier at that time. But that kind of made me a bit hesitant. But it was now where I was trying to work out for me how I could gain sort of the best work-life balance. And, I'm a mom of two. My kids are still young, both under 5. And I wanted to be able to have a bit of flexibility. And if I needed to step away and do something to support them, I could do that. If I needed to work in the evenings or in the morning before they woke up, I could do that. So have that flexibility, but also have a little bit more independence in the choices that I make around what work I want to do, which clients I want to interact with, and link that to what my specific interests are. So it did take me a bit of time on and off before I actually took the leap. But, I wasn't, even at the time when I took the leap, I still wasn't sure that it was the right decision. For the first couple of months, I thought, have I made the right decision? But definitely, I think preparing, financially, I was trying to save a bit before I left so that I had a little bit of a buffer, and just really working out what I wanted in terms of my career and in terms of my work-life balance as well, and trying to put something together that, addressed all of my needs from a personal and a work point of view.
Love that, because, I often say I consulted with a physio just this morning who wants to now, start a practice. She's a single mom, recently divorced, and we had the consultation, and the first thing she wanted to go into was like, oh, should I get a practice number? I'm like, whoa, Nelly, like, just hold your horses there for a moment. This is what everybody does. They immediately jump towards the operational stuff of like, okay, I'm going to start a practice. What are the things I need to do? And they focus on all the administrative things, which are easy to do in the grand scheme of things. But the analogy I said to her was like, let's say you're going to hop in the car with your 2 kids and decide to take a road trip. So you need to have fuel in the car, you need to pack snacks for the road, you need to, pack clothes in and all of those things. Those are the operational things like getting a practice number, getting your malpractice insurance, all of that stuff. But now you're in the car, but you don't know where you're going. So you don't know how much money you need to have for the journey. You don't know how many stops. If your kids are small, are they going to need to pee along the road? Like you haven't got any clue because you went straight into packing the car without first planning your journey, right? And so that sounds like what you did was that you, before you kind of just jumped straight in and made a website and put yourself out there, you first thought, well, what is the reason I want to do this? It's because of flexibility for my kids, which means that whatever business I need to create needs to serve that, because what is the point? And lots of women, particularly women OTs, lots of female health professionals go into practice because they want the flexibility, because they started a family. And then the irony is they start a practice and they end up working more hours for their practice and have less flexibility than when they were in a 9 to 5 job, because they didn't intentionally create their practice around their personal vision. And then you also mentioned the fact that you made sure that you had your financial ducks in a row to save, to make sure you had some kind of buffer so that, you can still support yourself and survive, in the early stages of business. So I really love that example that you gave. But can you share then, despite all of that, there's going to be challenges when you start practice, and especially because you were starting something that was quite unique within our industry. So tell me a bit about, like, what were your biggest challenges in getting the business actually off the ground and started?
So when I was in the corporate space, I thought, I've got some really great skills. I've got people management skills, and I know how to put a strategy together and build programs. And I was quite kind of confident in my abilities. And I thought, that's fantastic. I'll carry that over. But what I had underestimated was all the support and resource that I had in the corporate space that I now wouldn't necessarily have in the sort of entrepreneurial journey. When I started out, I thought, okay, well, I need legal to look over this. And I was like, there is no legal, right? I have to hire someone, or I have to figure that out myself. And I was like, in corporate, I would just send to marketing, or, get the sales guy to go and sell that product, or, ask finance to look over this for me. Whereas I was like, I'm now finance and legal and marketing and sales. And that for me was quite a kind of a rude awakening, because I was like, well, I'm very good at what I do, and I'm confident in my role as OT and program developer, but I'm not confident in my role as an IT professional in setting teams and setting up a new computer and, getting a domain and all of that. So that for me was just quite intense. And I've spent a lot of time online, Googling and using ChatGPT to figure out how to upload this and how to do that. So that was a big challenge, just trying to figure that all out. And I kind of had this impression that, I might spend the first week or two doing sort of all the admin stuff, getting that out the way, and then really start building programs and selling, straight after that. Whereas I'm still doing the admin stuff. I don't think it ever disappears, but as soon as you sort of close off one thing, then you developing the next template. And, I've learned to use Canva, which is not something I'd used in the past. So yeah, that was I don't know if it was necessarily a challenge, but definitely an eye-opening experience for me. Another thing, as you mentioned, was trying to get people to understand what I do. And very often I would say to people, I'm starting up this company. And they say, oh yeah, like about OT. And I'm like, no, not about rehab OT. It's more consulting, it's health and disability management. And very often even the OTs are going, what is that? Is that even a thing? So I've had to do a lot of sort of background coaching almost to get people to understand what it is, because they're definitely not going to buy the product if they don't actually even know what I do and if that even exists as a profession. So that's been a lot of work and some challenges that I've had to do. And I've been trying to do some sort of information sharing on LinkedIn and doing a lot of networking with people face to face. And, whenever I get the opportunity to sort of give people that insight and especially clients. And then another challenge that I've had is really just getting the sale through. So where I've got a lot of connections from my time in the insurance industry and in the wellness industries. I've met a lot of people from insurers to employers to brokers. And I have leaned on those connections either to connect me to other people, or, I've gone and actually done proposals to those people. And I've seen a lot of interest. A lot of people want the services. They can see the value, but it's quite difficult to actually get them to commit and sort of put their money where their mouth is, right? So that for me, I thought would be a bit easier. You go, you do the pitch, they like it, they say, okay, where can you start? Whereas sometimes, I've been doing the pitch for a certain service in February or March. And now in the last 2 weeks, I've heard back from those people to say, okay, yeah, well, we're now ready to go ahead with that. We've now got budget. We know we want to move forward. So I've learned a lot of patience, and I've become a lot more realistic in actually, understanding, how many of my leads are actually going to turn into, services. So those are a few of the challenges and the learnings that I've had moving into this space.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on now like the mindset stuff, which is, knowing where you're going, what you want exactly. And then we went into like basically the marketing stuff, right? Which is your business can't exist without customers and to generate revenue. And this is a difficulty that I think even in a clinical setting, when people start a practice, it's like, well, how do I get feet through the door? But I think it's even more challenging in the corporate space because, you're not dealing with an individual, and the person that you maybe speak to initially is maybe not the final decision maker. So, and there's a lot more processes that need to follow. And so the lead time or the sales cycle is a lot longer in a corporate setting, especially because like also the amounts that you're dealing with is larger. But there's two elements to that, right, which you kind of touched on. The first one is you first need to get the opportunity to pitch in the first place, right? You first need to get your foot in the door there. And you mentioned like your networks and things like that. And then the second part is then once you do get the opportunity to, sell your product, is that you need to close the sale. Let's talk first about the first one, because for a lot of people listening to this, that is the thing that frightens them the most. I mean, we know health professionals are a bleeding heart society. They don't like this idea of selling. And so now on top of it, you're saying, I want to be in the corporate space, but at the same time, corporate people scare me. Like you see this man or this woman in a suit and they like, these business people. And what if they ask me like complicated money questions and I look like a total fool because I have no clue about like how corporates work? Like, what advice would you give to OTs who are wanting to break into that consulting corporate space, whether it's similar to what you're doing or something completely different, in terms of how do they get their foot in the door? How do they know who the right people are to kind of connect with, who are the pathway to the decision makers? And how do they then get that invitation to have that opportunity to pitch their services?
So I would say the best place to start, if you are looking to get into a role of a claims assessor or a disability absence incapacity case consultant in a wellness space, or like you say, even something that I'm doing, working as a sort of health and disability management consultant, would be start by starting a LinkedIn profile, put all your information up there, put a picture of yourself, and start connecting with people who are in the industry in which you either want to work or you want to sell your products to. So if you are looking, maybe you're in a clinical role, you've been working clinical for the last 5 years, and now you want to move into a claims assessor role. Go onto LinkedIn, Google claims assessor, search claims assessors at Discovery, at Pollard, at Liberty, at Momentum. Find people and try and connect with those individuals. Firstly, it will allow you to see the kind of information they're sharing. Very often they'll share vacancies in their organizations, which is a good place for you to actually find a vacancy. It'll also allow you the opportunity to actually connect with them and start a conversation. And I found people, especially, OTs and physios and nurses and speech therapists that are in that claims assessing space and even in the greater corporate space, they are very helpful. So if you reach out to someone and you say, I'm looking to move into this role, how best do I go about this? What skills should I work on? What courses should I do that would make me better suited to that role? They typically are going to come back to you, going to give you some guidance. And so connect with these people, reach out to them, ask them questions, ask around if they know of any vacancies that might be, suited to you. Like I said, any courses or things that they think you could do that would, make it better suited to the role. And also you can look out for mentors. And this is something that is underutilized in the OT space, is the mentorship. And typically you see, especially on a business entrepreneurial platform, people are really utilizing mentors to help them grow. Whereas in OT, I think we sometimes maybe feel shy to reach out to somebody we don't know and ask for help, or, we don't really know how to go about doing that. I, in the last year, have had a couple of people, young OTs that are either new into the clinical space or in clinical and looking to move into the VOC rehab space, reach out to me and say, well, can we have a call? Can we get your thoughts on how we go about doing this? And I've done some mentorship sessions with them to give them some guidance, to give them some very sort of frank answers on the pros and the cons, in the corporate space. So networking, mentorship really is the biggest thing that I could recommend. Networking on LinkedIn, networking at courses and events that you go to, even if it's another clinical OT, talk to them. OTs, physios, we're all very well connected. We always know someone in this space or in that space. So if you say, I'm looking for a role in a corporate, or I'm looking to connect with somebody who does disability management, they'll always be able to say, I have this friend and I'll give you her number, or look on LinkedIn, or I'll put a connection request or something like that. So do that. And then even networking on a social basis, and I've actually found that for me in my career has led me to getting jobs, getting business, in my organization, and just growing as a whole. When you're sitting at a braai or something, chatting to someone and saying, "Oh, this is what I want to do," or "This is what I do," or I'm looking for a company who does X, Y, and Z that I can partner with. And there's always going to be someone who's going to say, "Oh, my cousin," or "I know someone," or "I work in this company," and maybe you could send your company profile through to them. So don't underestimate the power of networking on a professional and social level in order to meet the right people. And then don't be afraid of asking questions, so that, firstly, is that an area I want to move into? And secondly, what do I need to do to get into that area?
Yeah.
And just the mentorship thing, I cannot emphasize that enough, because I think everyone could benefit from that. Even if you have a lot of experience, there's always someone with more experience from you, and they would be willing to give assistance on a mentorship basis.
Absolutely. So the next part would be then, so you meet the people, you get these leads and opportunities that you know about, and now you get the opportunity to pitch for business. Now, there's two parts to this question, right? The one part is, like you said, now, there's the close, so you have to pitch. So what is it that you would recommend? How do people prepare, when they have their first opportunity to pitch? But there's a very important second part, which leads into the money part of the conversation. Already, practitioners struggle with this thing of rates, which understandably also is linked to the fact that we are so limited or regulated when we are working in a clinical setting. If that's what the medical schemes are willing to pay, and the area you're working in are people who can't afford to pay ahead of time out of pocket, then you have to just charge what they charge, even if the cost to provide the service means that you're not going to really make a profit. But now suddenly you into this corporate space, and it's like, you have no frame of reference, because even if you worked in corporate, the business gets given to you, you do the work, right? You're not really involved in the setting, costing, and all of that stuff. So the second part of the question is, one, how do you prepare for pitching in a corporate environment so that you can feel confident and that you present in the correct way? What do corporates look for? And then two, how do you decide on your pricing for your services?
Okay. All right. No, very good questions. So with regard to pitching, and I can say that over the last year, I've improved in this area, definitely. But what I try and do is to figure out what the problem is that person or organization or corporate is experiencing. So I think early days, I kind of went in and I said, well, these are all the services I offer. What do you want, and when can I start? Whereas they're like, oh, that's nice and that's interesting, and we'll let you know if we ever need any of those. Whereas if you can do research before and try and see sort of what the goals, what the aims of that corporate are that they're specifically working on, where they've had problem areas. And even if you ask those questions, if you ask them in an email before your meeting, or you even ask them at the beginning of your meeting to say, what is it that keeps you up at night? Where are your biggest problem areas? If you could have somebody solve one problem for you, what would that be? And so you need to have the context, but then you ask that question. Then you need to look at the services that you offer and which of those services could address that problem or support that client in, with the issue that they're having, or that need, or that goal that they have. And then you sort of go and you talk to that service specifically, and you explain how that service is going to solve that problem for them. And I found that I've had a lot better success with sort of that way of pitching, as opposed to this read through my company profile and tell me what you need, whereas because then you're really making it personalized. Firstly, they can see the effort that you've put into understanding their business and the interest that you have in actually solving their problem and not just making money. And they appreciate that. And then they can go back and say, yes, well, this is a problem we have, when they're presenting it to senior management or exco. This is the person, this is a solution that this person has offered us. And where possible, if you can give some kind of insight into a return on investment. And I think that maybe ties into the second part of your question, but especially in corporate, they would potentially spend the money, but they want to know how much that's going to save them, in the long run. Even if it is an insurance industry that's helping with disability or medical aid, they still have to watch their finances, the financial implications that affects the clients, it affects the premiums. So you have to always bring it back to what the return on investment is. And, you have this problem, I can offer the solution, and I believe that is going to, save you X amount over a year or 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is. So that return on investment is really important. It's a difficult thing to work out, and it's not always an exact science, but where possible, that is really helpful to add. And it might not be your initial pitch, but maybe at a later stage once you really get into discussing the details. And then in terms of pricing, I mean, it's really difficult. It's difficult to get an understanding of what pricing looks like across the industry, especially when you're creating a new product that there aren't, 20 other companies that are offering the same pricing. But what I've done is you can do Google searches. In some places you can actually find, what organizations are charging for training, what program development would look like. The more you interact with clients as well, they will sometimes give you feedback to say, okay, we did this and we paid this X amount. What I've sort of said is starting out to put a more conservative price to the services that I'm offering, because I think you also don't want to go in and demand this huge amount and actually just scare your potential clients away because of, your sort of overpricing. So I've also, how I typically price is I price on either an hourly basis if I'm doing a project that would be X amount of hours, or training sessions that's X amount of hours, or I work on a retainer basis where a company would pay me per month to do services for them, every month, or to, get involved. I do that a lot on the disability inclusion side. So, I offer support companies to support their clients in the disability inclusion space with reasonable accommodations, etc. So then they might pay me on a monthly basis, and then I just, offer them support wherever they need to in that space. So it is difficult, but I definitely would say don't go in too high. I know in the early stages you can sort of be wanting to make a bit of money, get up and running, and especially when you don't have a lot of clients, but rather be conservative initially and, get your foot in the door and show your worth. Then people will start sort of promoting you and there'll be word of mouth. And then you could potentially increase your pricing as you see that people are responding well to the service that you're offering.
Yeah. I think also like one of the things that I always like to recommend is that you're almost in a corporate space, it's all about them managing risk, right? So the return on investment conversation comes in because when they are spending money, then where does the risk lie for them in wasting that money, right, or that resource? And so when it comes to different pricing structure, that conversation also comes in. I once had a meeting with one of these providers when they wanted me to provide, like, as a contractor, an external service. And then they obviously asked the rates. went into like a complete panic mode of like, how do I figure this out? And then I just stopped and thought about it. And I was like, okay, so in the initial stages, because they're not sure about me and I'm not sure about them and like how it's going to play out, when the pricing structure is on an hourly basis, then the less hours that I spend, like the risk lies with me, because now, it's my time that I'm not being remunerated for all the hours that I might necessarily need, right? Because you can only bill for that hour, even if you do work outside that hour. But the more hours I end up spending, they end up spending more. So if I take a retainer, how do I shift the risk so that um, I need to take into account how much hours I'm now giving up of alternate revenue, but they need to be sure that they're not going to risk having like this hefty bill because I'm just racking up the hours. So you almost have to. So what we came to an agreement was, okay, we will start with an initial hourly basis, but the minute it reaches a certain amount of hours per month, we will shift over to retainer. So it becomes cheaper for them to do retainer, but I don't carry the risk of the inconsistent income, because now I know I have a set amount, so I can plan my time accordingly. So there are also opportunities to negotiate a change in structure. You don't have to go in and say, "Oh, this is my rate and that's it." And you can kind of learn, like when you watch like those Dragon's Dens and Shark Tank and all of that. You often get deals like that where the investor will say, "Okay, how about I'll give you what you ask, or I'll give you less than what you're asking. I'll take a higher percentage. But if you reach your goal of whatever you said, then I will fall down to the lower percentage." So it's stuff like that. Like you almost have to. And so I would say that as OTs, because we're not business equipped, right, then lean on those people around you who are. So, if you have a spouse who works in corporate, or a brother or a father or an uncle or whatever the case may be, like sit down with them and with the numbers and look at like what makes sense and how does this normally work in the space you normally work in. But that's some really, really excellent tips that you provide. So I think the last question, to kind of the last two questions. The one is that it sounds like all along what you're saying is that those OTs who feel like they want to get into what you're doing, more of a consulting role, they really do need to start, like, they need to almost have a journey. You can't just suddenly decide, I'm now going to be a consultant. This is like a whole other skill set, right? So would you say then, for an OT who's currently in a clinical role, maybe they're community service, maybe they're low cheming, and they feel like this is where they'd like to go, would you say that they need to first gain experience in a worker or an employed role within these environments, as like claim assessors or disability consultants within a paid job, to first learn the industry before they take the leap and just try and start a consulting business on their own?
So I wouldn't say it's essential. And I say that because I know of OTs who have moved from clinical work and opened up their own company and sort of pivoted. It might have been initially like a clinical practice and then sort of pivoted into other areas. So it isn't essential, but it definitely does help. And it definitely allows you to have a much more comprehensive view of the problem areas that your client's experiencing, how their processes and their systems work. And that, I think, is going to help maybe differentiate you from some of your competitors, in the environment. So I often think, okay, if I had to have been in clinical, in government, or even in private, and had to have tried to start this business up, there would be a lot of gaps that I have. Just like you say, just from a sort of business knowledge point of view, I probably wouldn't have known what a return on investment is, or, just those simple things. What is expo? It's things that you just pick up along the way as you are, involved in a job in the corporate space. So I would recommend, especially if you're in the early stages of your career, if you want to over time move into a role similar to what I'm doing, or open a consulting company like Blue Balance, to try to get as much hands-on experience as you can, with maybe the clients that you would like to be working with. And going back to the networking, I mean, that the networking is one of the biggest things. The connections that you make in those environments with other OTs and physios and business people and clients. It's just that is also really helpful, when you do go on your own. So it's not essential, but it is extremely helpful if you can get that hands-on experience in a corporate space.
Yeah. Yeah. So my last question then is, it's kind of like also a two-pronged question. One is that if you could go back in time to when you decided you're going to resign and start your new business, what is there anything you would advise yourself like 1.5, 2 years ago, to do things, anything that you would advise yourself to do differently? And the flip side, is there anything that you would like tell yourself, you know what, Michelle, I want to pat you on the back and tell you this is something that you are going to be so proud of in 2 years' time?
So one thing that I would recommend is if you can start with some of the sort of administration before you leave your job. So obviously that you need to be careful that there's not like a conflict of interest, and do not necessarily offering a service that is going to be competing with where you're working. If you can start with basic things, registering your company, working on a website, putting together a company profile, designing a PowerPoint template, those kind of things, which is not actually customer facing, it's not sales or anything like that, but those are really time consuming things that if you could do them on the weekends or in the evenings while you're still employed, while you're still earning a salary, that will save you a lot of time. I unfortunately didn't do that, so that was a big learning for me. The reason was that in the role that I was in, I was working extremely hard, extremely long hours, evenings, weekends, just doing the job that I was doing. So I actually didn't have a lot of time to, spare time to be doing other work. And it was only really when I resigned and I stopped that then I started from scratch. I then started Googling, or how do you register a company, and what is a good bank account for a business. So if I had the time, or, as a recommendation with someone else, I would say try to do that, open that bank account before that on day one, where you really are, starting in this business, you're now jumping in, you can start trying to go straight to, selling and all of that, because you've taken care of a lot of the admin. That would be one of the big recommendations. What would I be most proud of, I think, was the second part of your question. I think I would say finally having a work life and health balance. At a lot of different stages in my career, I haven't necessarily had that balance. There's been times where my personal life has really, been a priority, and then other times where my work has taken over. And as much as I tried to have that balance, I just couldn't. And I think this year has really been a good experience for me, and I've really consciously focused on having that balance. So I still work a full work day, but it doesn't always look like 8 to 5. Very often it starts at 4:30 and at 6. I stop to sort my kids out, get them ready for school, then jump back on at 8, then take 2 hours off, in the middle of the day to take them to swimming lessons, come back, maybe work in the evening. So I still do everything that I need to, but I'm able to be present, with my family, take care of my personal health as well. I can say, like, in a lot of times in my life, I didn't eat very well, and I didn't exercise because I didn't have the time or the motivation to do that, because that wasn't really a focus for me. Whereas now I'm really trying to take the time out to do that, take the time to look after my kids, and then also focus on, growing my business and interacting with clients and colleagues in between that. So yeah, I also spend a lot of time networking with other business owners, and that's been, a great eye opener for me as well, to get that feedback from them as to, what programs are they using, what works, what doesn't work, what should I try, where do you get, a good photographer to take, like professional pictures. So basic things like that, is what I kind of would recommend to someone. And would be sort of my proudest moment, I think, is finally having that work-life balance.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. It was very fascinating listening to your journey and all the tips that you gave. I think it's really refreshing to hear a different perspective, but also you shared so many golden nuggets, which I think people will find really valuable. And I do hope that occupational therapy does grow in this space, and even not necessarily corporate, just in general in program development, and a lot of even like if you look at the World Health Organization or the UN, they've got lots of programs where they are looking for people that ideally an occupational therapist should fill that role, but they don't know that that's what we are able to do. But
Yeah.
I do see that there's a new, view over the horizon that we are moving towards that space. And I think the younger generation are the ones that are taking us there because they are willing to put themselves out there. So thank you once again. I really enjoyed having the conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a nice experience. And yeah, I really hope that this is valuable to other OTs and health professionals looking to, yeah, just expand or pivot in their careers.
So, of course, I will put all the information about your company in the description below. But you also mentioned, you have had younger OTs reach out to you mentoring. Is that something that you are open to as well if people want to reach out to you for mentorship sessions?
Absolutely. I'm more than happy. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or on my website. There's a space where you put down a kind of a query. So you're more than welcome to reach out if you have questions, if you want to do some mentorship, if you want to run an idea by me. And I am so passionate about OT and sort of uplifting the young OTs as well, that I'd be more than happy to chat about that and connect you to some of my connections if there's a need for that as well.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tasneem.